Good morning, church family. I hope you're doing well. And it is our last reading for the week on this Friday morning, and we are done with the story of Esther. And this morning we are just taking a very brief look into the book of Nehemiah. Today, our reading is Nehemiah chapters 1 and 2, and today's actually the only days that we're going to spend in Nehemiah. So I'm going to tell you what's going on in 1 and 2 and kind of let you know where it goes from there. And so what's happened up until this point is now the Israelites have been freed from exile. Many of them had been returned back to Israel. And but Nehemiah he stayed where he was. He was the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes, who was the king of Persia. And so what happens in Nehemiah 1 is he gets word from some of the people who were back in Judah and Israel, and he gets word that the city gate and that the walls of the city have been destroyed and that they're burned down, and he's very troubled. And he goes to the Lord in prayer, and he spends a lot of time talking to the Lord. And then we see that he goes before the king to be his cupbearer, to give him his wine. And the king looks at Nehemiah and he asks him, "Why are you sad? I can see on your face that there's much sadness." And Nehemiah says, "Well, how can I not be sad when my land, the land of my ancestors' graves," speaking of Israel, when it's in ruin, when it lays completely destroyed? And so the king says, "Well, what is your request?" And Nehemiah says, "Well, if you have favor on me," he said, "let me go and rebuild the walls in Jerusalem." And so Nehemiah actually asked the king to provide letters that he can give to the people, to the provinces he's passing through, so he will be able to go through safely. Even a letter to the man named Asaph, who is the keeper of the forest, so that he can go there and get some of the trees and some of the timber there so that he can rebuild the walls and rebuild the city gate. And the king provides all of these things for Nehemiah so that he can return to Israel and that he can fix and rebuild the walls and the gate of the city. And all of this that we see in Nehemiah 1 and 2 is not about Nehemiah, but it's actually about the goodness of God. Over and over again, Nehemiah references the goodness of God and the favor that God has on him, and even God using and working in the hearts of these evil leaders to allow them to go back and to rebuild and to allow them safe passage and to allow them the resources that they need to rebuild it. So Nehemiah goes and he inspects the walls and he makes it there safely. He goes into Jerusalem. He takes a few men with him, and then they decide that they are going to rebuild the broken down walls. And so that's kind of where chapter 2 ends. He says, "Let us rise up and build." And it says, "So they strengthened their hands for the good work." And then a couple people heard of it and came against them and said, "Are you rebelling against the king?" And Nehemiah said, "The God of heaven will make us prosper, and we his servants will arise and build. But you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem." And we see throughout this story that God is showing his power. He is showing his sovereignty and his majesty, that even though some are opposing it, that he makes a way for it to happen, for his city to be restored. And so then throughout this, we see the wall is rebuilt. We go on to see that Nehemiah actually becomes the governor of Judah here, and he rules over it, where then Ezra, as we read about earlier, is with the priest there. And we see God just do a lot of amazing things as they rebuild the city of Jerusalem. But the real amazing thing about this story in Nehemiah is that it all points to God, that he recognizes that none of this would have been possible without God. And I think about that in our lives, that a lot of times we like to claim victories for ourselves. We like to see good things that we've done and point to ourselves and pat ourselves on the back even. But we must realize and recognize that truly it is God who accomplishes all of any good thing that happens, that all good works are of God, that he has gone and set out before us that simply we just must walk in obedience to him as he does the good work. And so I hope you're encouraged this morning that if you serve the God of Israel, if you serve Jesus, then you can know that he is working for good, that all the good that he does only requires us to obey him. And so our last reading of the week today, Nehemiah chapters 1 and 2. I hope you get some time this morning alone to spend in his word as we see God's hand at work rebuilding Israel. So this is our last reading for the week. I look forward to being with you again next week. But until then, I will see you Sunday morning.